This video is for Art 1 for the week 3, and we're dealing with value once again, and value is an element of art. It's the most important, and we see that it's the most important through contrast, and that's a technique for applying value. We also spent time understanding gradation. For this week, you have to do the worksheet that is on Google Classroom. Just looking at art and analyzing where do you see contrast and where do you see gradation. Also, this video covers the next assignment for week 3, which is 5 shadow types. Now, I have a drawing here, and this looks like a pond, maybe, a puddle, a blob. We don't know what it is, but I will tell you I have some value in it, and that value represents the color. If I were to use a certain color on there, that is what this value represents. So what I mean by that is that color has value, which we're going to learn about in the next couple weeks using 5 shadow types. I'm going to show you how this blob turns into form. But it's real important that you first know that the color you first put onto any shape is called midtone. Midtone is exactly what it's about. It's like a middle gray or a middle value, and it's also usually in the middle of our shape. It is not affected by light or shadow. So I'm going to put does not affect it. Okay. So it's real important to know, because as I build this shape and you start to see it change, you'll go, oh, I get it now. Okay, so we'll come back to this. Okay, this is image 1. This is how you start pretty much any shape when you draw and you shade it. Correct? Image 2, for this one, if I can grab it. There's a change here, and maybe you can see that change right off the bat. I still have my midtone, but now something else has disappeared, and look at what that is. So in 5 shadow types, what happens is we have to think about where the light source is coming down onto our shape, and it leaves a really bright spot, and that bright spot is called highlight. Highlight is what we see on water surface, also on glass. It's the brightest thing, and a lot of objects. If you look around the room right where you're sitting, you will see lots and lots of highlights on everything. Our eyelashes and hair have highlights. It's on everything physical. So this is what direct light, and the direct light is hitting, oops, I'm spelling it wrong. Let me scratch that off. This is direct light, and it's hitting on top of our shape. Now, if my light was coming from the other direction, it would hit at the bottom of the shape. It's real important because you as an artist, you're going to decide where your light source is coming from. So we have midtone. This is our first of 5 shadow types. We have highlight. This is the second of our shadow types. When you're doing your shape, I want you to start with your midtone, and then you're going to erase your highlight. Okay, so you just, when you get better at doing this, you can actually walk around with your color and not even touch where your highlight goes. And I gotta tell you that sometimes the shape gets highlighted all the way across the shape. It depends on what it is. For instance, let's look at the world. When the when the sun brightens up the face of the earth, it's not just picking one spot, it picks the whole entire half hemisphere. Okay, so you want to think about that. How direct is your light changes on your shapes. Alrighty, I hope we understand highlight and that it is direct light hitting a surface and it makes it a little lighter color. If this was a red shade here, this would be pink or white, okay? And some artists can take advantage of that and make it different colors. Okay, that is number 2. The third of our shadow types looks very obvious here. We have a shape once again. You can see the highlight, and you can see this shadow. This is called shadow edge. It is always opposite of the light. So if my light is here, on the other side of this particular blob is now a shadow. When you're putting this in, we have gradation. Okay, now look at my light. It's not showing up really well, so what I might do to make it pop a little bit more, like let's say it's a really sunny day, what I can do is darken my midtone, and I end up with this really nice, and I'm going to shade this out a little bit with my stump. We end up with a little brighter sunshine on the top of that rock or blob. Okay, so now you can see that highlight is starting to pop out a little bit more. And we don't want the shadow to be dull because we want it to look like it's a sunny day, so we have a darker shadow. Now, shadow edge means that it is on the edge, just inside your shape. Now, so far, this is the color you would normally put on your shape, and then you're erasing a highlight, and then you're adding a shadow. So really you have 3 values here. But with your gradation, you should have 4 or 5 within this shape. It's real important to know that both of these shadow types are inside the shape. So it is inside the shape and opposite of the light. Okay? So hopefully you understand that. Now, if it were mine, which this is, but I just wanted to show you some stuff, I would totally be giving this a lot more value, a lot darker, brighter, more contrasty shadow here. Don't make a line. I'm not looking for a line. I'm looking for an area value. So it looks like it's shaped like the shape. So you never want to put a flat line shape on for your shadow. Like I've seen students do some crazy stuff with shadow edge, and it makes it look like a different shape. So you want to actually shape your shadow lines or whatever you're doing to look round if it's a round shape and look flat if it's a square shape. And you probably saw that on the samples that I sent you on Google Classroom. I showed you samples with a rock and with a square shape, cylinder, and some glass. So you can see how light affects things. So you really want that kind of nice and dark, and the darker this becomes, the more bright sunny day it is. The brighter this becomes, the sunnier the day is. So you can always work with your midtone to be lighter or darker depending on what kind of surface it is and what kind of sun you have. If this is a fuzzy teddy bear, we would have a fuzzy highlight across here, and we wouldn't think really of sharp edges. But if this was a hard piece of glass, we would have a distinct hard edge between our midtone and our highlight. Okay, I'm going to move on, but I'm going to come back to this one because it has some quality to it that the other shadow types don't. Okay, so I'm going to move this one on. This is number 3. I'm going to put that on there. Number 3, so we have 3 shadow types so far. There are 5 total. Okay, as our 4th shadow type, this one's a little tricky to see because, if I'm going to point here, if our shadow edge is right along the inside of the shape, then that halo of the reflective light is right before the contour line, that outside line. So I'm going to zoom this in. Let's see if I can do that. And you can see that maybe a little bit more right in here. There's that line, that's the outside, and that little halo, the reflective light, is just inside. Now that halo should be the same tone as your mid-tone. Like that gray and that gray should match. If you made this extremely bright, what happens is it competes with the highlight. And we don't want that. The highlight is from your direct, really bright first light. This is considered second light. So where does this light come from? Let me wing back out a little bit. If my light source is coming from over here, oh, my marker is a little dull, but that's okay. If my light source is coming from over here, then this light is coming down, bouncing off of a tabletop, and then coming back to the shape on the bottom edge, typically. Because usually the table is below the object. There may be another object over here that it hits and bounces to it. If two shapes are floating around in space, they may bounce light back and forth and shadows. Okay, so this is number 4. Number 4. One last shadow type, and I want you to be aware that on this last shadow type, it's the only one that's going to be on the outside. So if you look here at all of these, we have 4 shadow types on this shape. We have the highlight right here. We have the mid-tone right in here. We have the shadow edge. And then we have reflective light. All right, so 4 of them are inside the shape. All right, now we're going to go to number 5. For number 5, I only gave you what was left. My shape is still here. In fact, I'll outline it so you can see that. Now you can see it. But look what's left. If we took all those 4 other shadow types out, we're left with only the shadow from our light. So here's what's important to know about this last one. The shadow has an angle to it, and that angle is dictated by the angle of the light. So once again, I had light coming this way, and look at where my light is coming from. It's angled. All right, so when you look at that sample or those samples that I show you on Google Classroom of how the light is affecting on the rock and on the cylinder, on the glass, you'll see this happening on most of those shapes, depending on where it is placed according to the light. So if my light was up high, I'd have a very shy and short shadow. If my light is really low, I'd have a very long shadow. Okay? So also, if it's in front, my shadow should show up on the back someplace, according to your angle. Now these shadows are really cool. First of all, they're cast from the shape. And so when I talk about cast shadow, what makes that a cast shadow is the fact that it lays upon something. If there's nothing for it to lay on, this shadow doesn't exist. So it's real important to know that number 5 is the actual most important for understanding it, as we know shadows to be on the ground and stuff. But the other 4 are the most important for showing form. So I wanted to declare these separate a little bit. Also with our cast shadow, if we have another shape floating around, it could be casting a shadow on that shape if there are 2 shapes in space someplace. However, then in that case you don't need a tabletop. Shadows can climb walls. If there's a wall over here, my shadow can go up the wall. And it can also climb down things, like if there's something casting a shadow on this particular rock, the shadow can look like the shape of the rock. So when you're looking around at things in your own space, check out that kind of phenomena that happens with shadows. Another thing to note is that it's really dark along the base of the shadow, and then it dissipates out. Now this is a kind of a cheater. If you were doing something very intricate, let's say like a tree top with all the branches and sticks, and you wanted the tree to cast a shadow. Let's see, even my pen's casting a shadow. And the tree sticks could all be drawn like a shadow, very nice and detailed, or you can make it so that the shadow dissipates a little bit and you don't see any sticks. You don't have to draw all those sticks. But what you do have to do is draw the shadow to the tree trunk a little deeper and deeper with gradation. So let's talk about gradation on all 5 of these shadow types. Before I do that, I want to make sure that you understand this, what is called shadow that's cast. So cast shadow is number 5. And once again, it is outside of the shape. And it has to lay on something, so it has to be on an object or a tabletop. Floor, wall, something with a hard surface, okay? So if this shadow is dark here, there's gradation. We understand this softens out. It's like a fluffy pillow. We have a cloud kind of shadow here. What happens if it's a really bright day? We might have an extremely edgy, sharp edge on our shadow shape, but the whole thing would be colored in really dark. The other thing about that is if I decide to shade on the back surface, or the background of my piece, what happens with the highlighted portion, and I'm just doing this really quick, my shading is not the best, but it kind of helps you understand what I'm talking about. If I shade that, what happens with this part is it pops off the back of where the wall or the sky are. And the other really cool thing is if I really get in here and create a value that's the same as my line, then the line disappears. So you guys are going to be practicing this on 2 assignments. Complete. One is going to be shaded and the other one is going to be colored. So I want you to really understand the shading portion before we ever go to color. And when we go to color, we're not going to be painting right away. We're going to be talking about color first and value with color. But this kind of helps you get there. So we are building knowledge with our shadow types, with gradation and with contrast. Notice how this is contrasting. So they separate, they kind of compete with each other, and the whiter or the warmer thing pops forward and shadows push back into space. So that's cool. So once again, cast shadow has to sit outside of the shape. It's the only one that does. And then it has to have another object for it to lay upon. So the first shadow type we have is the regular color of anything. So if we could imagine this as a round ball, normally students make this red, but it really, if it's round, still is just a round circle. It's not a sphere. Okay, so, but that color that you would make red for a round ball is called midtone. Okay. Then our second shadow type is highlight. This is the one that has direct light hitting the surface, and it's usually at the top. That is why it's called high light. And highlight is direct light. It has an angle according to what you decide as the artist. It's the brightest spot you'll see on your form. And you can tell that when you're looking at objects in space that have light hitting them. And you can check that. My third one is shadow edge. Shadow edge again is the shadow opposite of the light. It's dark and it has gradation. It also sits just inside the shape. Notice these three create form. So we got highlight, midtone, and shadow edge. If you start with just these three, you will start to understand what the shadow types do for a realistic looking drawing. Number 4, and I'm sorry I drew all over this one, but you can see the highlight, the midtone, shadow edge. And number 4 is the halo just inside the shape. I mentioned early in my video that if you forgot to put in your reflective light, how can you put it in without erasing? What you can do is redraw your outside line just a little bit away, and that would be your reflective light. I hope that makes sense. I know there's several different lines on here and it might get confusing, but all you're doing is putting in an extra outline and you're using that as your reflective light. Okay? So once again, we have highlight, midtone, shadow edge, and then reflective light. And number 5, cast shadow.